guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Tonight we're back here with X History with part 2 of the Crimean War. Called If It Bleeds, It Leads. Alright, this gotta be interesting. Too sure this is gonna go, but one way to know for sure. Last time we saw the start of the war, religious conflicts leads to this, so let's see how things start off for the girl. So be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Let's go.
Port of Sinop, Ottoman Empire,
All right.
November 30th, 1853. Admiral Osman Pasha involuntarily ducks as the shell screams overhead,
That was
feeling
close.
his insides vibrate as it detonates. Hot iron tears into the sails and decking of the frigate next to his flagship, while men scream for water, carrying buckets to put out the fires the
Whoa, what
shells have
up?
started. They're cut down by shrapnel from the next volley. He's heard about these guns. Cannons that fire explosive shells rather than the solid cannonballs his fleet is equipped with. Their use is still militarily controversial, but it seems the Russian Navy has clearly decided that they are the future, and Osman Pasha's fleet is the first to experience that future. Limping from a shrapnel wound in his foot, he orders his flagship to run aground so it will not sink. His fleet, much of the Empire's naval power, lies burning, and yet the Russians continue to fire.
Jeez. Or Ottomans. Wanted some protection, and now
Thanks so
God's
much to
pretty much
Billion
going
for
after
helping
him.
us tell today's
I mean, in
historic
a
tale.
sense,
When Tsar Nicholas I sent his troops across the Danube and into Ottoman territory, he was sure that the European nations wouldn't come to the Ottomans' defense. And honestly, he had good reason to believe that. Back in 1844, he'd personally met with the British government and signed a secret memo between the two, agreeing on a partition of the Ottoman Empire were it to fall. Because they were both alarmed by the French economic and colonial expansion
and the
into
old
Middle
rivalries.
East, and he'd raised this agreement with the British in the days leading up to the outbreak of war. And the British didn't intervene, at first. While Britain and France had expressed private support to the Ottomans at the outset of the war,
So
their
what
first
changed?
actions when the fighting started was to hold a conference between Britain, France, Prussia, and Austria to create a diplomatic solution acceptable to all parties. Now, this was how the Concert of Europe had been designed in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, gathering to resolve disputes via diplomacy rather than combat. And while they debated, they insisted Russia could defend its territory, but take no aggressive actions. This time,
Yeah, ironic considering, tried this later. Took a few years before this whole thing was like, hey, okay, we'll go with that. Again, with nukes and stuff we can do nowadays, easier just to go to the Baltic table rather than the battlefront. Back then, I think there were still more battle-hungry soldiers out there at the rift anyway. Oh, this concert holds up.
however, the Concert of Europe failed. Ottoman Sultan Abdülmecit I rejected their initial peace proposal as too beneficial to Russia, and then when they rewrote it, Russia rejected it as too slanted toward the Ottomans.
Yeah, here we go.
Truth be told, not all of these governments really wanted to broaden this conflict. For example, Britain's ruling party would rather the Ottomans defend themselves, and the Ottomans worried that if the French and British had to save them, it would open the door for these stronger allies to push them around as junior partners. But the Battle of Sinop changed all that. Not only had Russia taken the aggressive action the concert had forbid, its new dominance of the Black Sea was seen as a challenge to British and French naval power. Increasingly, Britain thought, war might be necessary to prop up the Ottomans, lest Russia consume it, upsetting the balance of power. And while Nicholas didn't see this coming, truth be told, he didn't fully grasp how Britain functioned. As an autocrat who never bothered studying other governments, he didn't get the role opposition parties and public opinion could play in shifting policy. To him, he'd spoken with the British royals.
This is why you gotta look up other governments, not your own.
Plan, and that was going to be it, right? But what he underestimated most of
3,
all
2,
was the
1.
free press, which revealed itself as a far more potent weapon than the explosive shells used at Sinop. British and French
it's mightier than the
newspapers
sword,
cast
after
the
all.
Russian victory at Sinop as a massacre, quoting a British witness who claimed that the Russian fleet continued to fire, even when the Ottoman ships could no longer fire back. Though this was a pretty common practice in naval warfare, the virulently Russophobic British press, already known for printing conspiracy theories about Russian plans to dominate Europe, made it a celebrated cause. And of course, Sinop
basically
was
the
exactly
press
the
brought
kind
about
of
it,
aggressive action Russia had been warned against. Public opinion swung toward the war party in Parliament, and after Russia ignored a British and French ultimatum to withdraw from Ottoman territory, the two declared war on March 28, 1854. Again, the press was decisive. In previous wars, recruiters would have to entice men to enlist by offering upfront bonuses, but now newspapers largely did the work of whipping up nationalistic fervor and trumpeting the glories to be found on the battlefield. Yeah. So across the
Yeah, remember, back then, war was still seen as like, woohoo, we're off to our adventure, and we're gonna be heroes! Oh god, so that was pretty much it. Just, why not you? It's about to go off to war to, well, see it. Well, remember, this was before the World Wars, remember, so yeah, the World War would bring about this whole, like, oh god, terrible. Here, it was a leisurely sport in a way. I mean, it's not like, oh, it's Sunday and they will go back home. Nope. Oh, that's medieval times. Hey, come on. But yeah, basically, it was pretty much just nationalistic fervor that kept these dumb. Nope. Anyway.
UK, young men flocked to sign up for adventure, leaving their
Dear-
villages and cities
dear
in smart
boys,
uniforms
dear.
and singing lighthearted songs. However, the Royal Navy was already engaged in the conflict. Before joining the war, the British and French fleets had moved into Turkish waters and then the Black Sea in order to serve as a deterrent. But it was in the Baltic Sea that they struck the first blow. A massive Anglo-French fleet hit the Baltic in April, and within days was in sight of the Russian capital of St. Petersburg. However, after trying the fortress protecting it and finding its defenses too formidable, the fleet decided instead to destroy the smaller fortresses and ports around the Baltic, burning supplies and threatening the capital, so Russia was forced to retain a large army in the area rather than sending it south. The Russian Baltic Fleet, terrified of this larger force, mostly huddled around the shore batteries near St. Petersburg, relying instead on their new invention of sea mines to damage their enemies. Now, it's important to remember that this campaign effectively won the war. The Allies had bottled up Russia's Baltic Fleet, tied down huge numbers of troops, and instituted an economic blockade that would, more than anything, force the Russians to eventually sue for peace. And better still, they'd done it with few casualties on either side. So they were considered heroes, right? Oh, they weren't?
No.
Oh, man. In fact, the British press printed scathing articles that mocked the Allied commanders and accused them of cowardice for not attacking St. Petersburg. And this lack of major battles ensured that the
war's about honor in this case
would go largely unremembered, while the less strategically vital battles on the Black Sea would become enshrined in stories and poems due to the heroic amounts of bloodshed. Yet, at the same time, the most consequential land battle of the war was going on, and the public largely didn't know it. In May of 1854, Russian forces drove south toward Constantinople, knowing that the Allies were on their way, but had not yet deployed in force. They aimed to take the Ottoman capital and bring the war to a speedy conclusion. But in their way was the Ottoman fortress of Silistra in what is now Bulgaria. With the French and British still marshalling their forces, unable to help, a force that eventually numbered 90,000 Russians besieged the 15,000 Ottoman soldiers in the fortress. The garrison were mostly Egyptians and Albanians, supported by a half-dozen British advisors that took command when the Ottoman general was killed by a shell, his blood splattering the prayer mat where he'd been making his devotions. For a month and a half, the Russian army pounded Silistra.
Prayer exception
Inside,
for war.
it was hell. But from a bluff, largely outside the line of fire, a young Russian artilleryman watched. June 21st, 1854, just outside Silistra. The artilleryman looks on enthralled as the faraway men kill each other. A young count, he had gambled away his fortune and joined the army to avoid his creditors. And while he enjoyed the action of military life,
he's hoping to die.
Perhaps writing was the path for him. That's what he mostly does at Silistra anyway. Stands on the bluffs, watching the battle, reflecting how strangely entertaining it is, and how oddly beautiful the night becomes, as shells burst and cannons stab orange into the darkness. His name is Leo Tolstoy, and his impressions of this war will bring him unprecedented literary success, and create one of the greatest novels of all time. However now, here, he's thinking of battle. Soon, they will storm the fortress in their final attack. Oh, what will he witness? Will he live? And if so, how will he describe it in his letters? Suddenly, their officer shouts, he has new orders. Limber up the guns, we're marching back north. But
back north?
Why?
Why
now?
What happened?
Tolstoy asks. Aren't they finally about to win? It's an order directly from Tsar Nicholas. Turns out, Austria has ceased its neutrality and massed 250,000 troops along their border. They intend to rush into the Russian-occupied Balkans and Danube region, pushing the Tsarist forces out unless the Russians leave peacefully. That territory will now be occupied by a joint Austrian-Ottoman force. Given that the British and French have landed 70,000 troops at Varna, the Russians can't win. So, to avoid them being trapped between two forces, the Tsar has pulled them out. The drive towards Constantinople has been cancelled, not by battle, but by maneuver and diplomatic threat. Tolstoy writes of his disappointment, but in truth, he need not fret for long. For he will see combat soon enough in the bloodiest theater of the conflict.
Oh,
a gory and grinding battle on a peninsula that will give the war its name, Crimea. You know, Zoe, there is...
And moves like that, the whole near pincer maneuver, is why you gotta make sure you got some allies in the war. Hence the alliance system that dragged many nations into World War I and II. Basically, you're on your own, it gotta work out, because, well, get allies, and, well, crushed. Hey, Paraguay, I think? Paraguay, they had a great economy, but ruler decided to pretty much fight all, I think 3 nations at once. Paraguay, but I don't remember. Not sure if I'm off, but anyway, we'll be seeing that battle of Alma later. But for now, thanks for watching, everybody. See ya.